Hello everyone, this is KansaiDorito, and this is the 13th episode of Girls Frontline to Explain, where we talk about the girls, their skills, and some of their backgrounds to get you caught up. Today we're going to talk about Qiongjiu, aka QBZ191, aka QJ, which is what I'm going to call her for the rest of the video because I suck at pronouncing Chinese names. QJ is a returning character from Girls Frontline 1, and no longer wears her bunny ears, which is a shame. Mika, please, give QJ her ears back. QJ is a sweetheart, with a casual and relaxed personality. At least until she's on the job, where she sheds it and becomes a stone-cold by-the-books operator. This work mode has caused her to gain a lot of respect and trust from Griffin and Kruger, so much that they made her the leader of the Frostfall Squad, the right hand of Hellion, the second-in-command turned leader of G&K, making QJ the highest-ranking T-Doll at Griffin and Kruger. Despite this serious role, QJ is still beloved by her team and all who know her, being very personable, sweet even when she's on her own time. Her weapon of choice is her namesake rifle, the QBZ-191, or the Yibai Qiuxi Yishi Zubdong Bojiang, made by legendary Chinese firearms company Norinco. But Norinco wasn't the beginning of China and assault rifles. The beginning is actually long before that, but to set the stage, let's go back to World War II. During the Second World War, China was in complete and utter chaos, fighting a civil war between the Republic of China and the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, and against an invading Japanese force. In this hell, 14 million Chinese civilians would die, and another 3 to 4 million military personnel. When the US ended the war in the Pacific, the Civil War immediately reignited, and the Soviet-backed CCP would come out on top, achieving their victory with the Mosin-Nagant. But by the point victory was decided, it was 1949, and bolt actions were way out of fashion for standard infantry, so they started using the SKS, a gas-operated semi-auto rifle made in Russia, renaming it to be the Type 56 semi-automatic rifle, which by that point was also fairly outdated. However, in the latter half of the 50s, the Soviets would give China the designs and the production equipment to start producing their own SKSs, but more important to our story, the AK-47. So that's exactly what they did, making the Type 56 assault rifle. I know, confusing. But the Type 56 assault rifle wasn't their main infantry weapon, and was put into the role of an SMG. But China wasn't stupid. The AK was a beast, and the Type 56 wasn't too damn shabby either, so later they created the Type 63, a weird love child of the Type 56 assault rifle and Type 56 semi-automatic rifle, which again, confusing. The Type 63 was basically a select fire SKS with the gas system from the Type 56 assault rifle, made with some replacement materials, but it sucked mega ass, and the PLA had it replaced again, with the Type 56 semi-automatic rifle again, which I know, confusing. By this point, Norinco was in the picture and was absolutely fucking over it, just like I was researching this. They decided to make a single weapons platform to replace their main infantry rifle and squad automatic weapons, the Type 81. An honest-to-god decent go at a main service rifle. It took aspects from the Dragunov, SKS, and the AK with a little emphasis towards service life, and the design would last, seeing use to this day. But Norinco has a little thing called ambition. They decided the 7.62 by 39mm rounds they've been using weren't good enough, and would begin on the designs of a new round, looking specifically to reduce the recoil and weight of the 7.62 and increase its accuracy in terminal ballistics. They would cook this new bullet for about 10 years, and then in 1987 unveiled a brand new round, the 5.8 by 42mm, and then quickly shift their focus to a weapon system to go with it. Throughout the late 80s and early 90s, they would try their new round with the Type 81, and experiment with a brand new gas-operated bullpup design. After 2 years of designing and 2 years of testing, the QBZ-95 would emerge. But to keep things brief, since the Type 95 is her own girl, their troops would struggle with a bullpup rifle, because bullpups suck, and Norinco would once again hit the drawing board. Instead of looking back at the 95, they would instead draw inspiration from the Type 81, realizing conventional rifles were conventional for a reason, and designed a proper, modern rifle, the QBZ-03. And this rifle was a hit, designed to use the 5.8 round and to be easily used by the average soldier. The People's Liberation Army Marine Corps, the People's Liberation Army Air Force paratroopers, and armed police would adopt it as standard issue, and Norinco would take the hint. In 2014, they would once again develop a new rifle, but this would be a weapon of the future, hoping to create the centerpiece for the Integrated Soldier Combat System, a program aiming to overhaul the entirety of the People's Liberation Army's infantry equipment. And in 2019, their new future rifle would be complete, the QBZ-191. The rifle would incorporate the best parts of the QBZ-03 and improve on the reliability, but most importantly the ergonomics, making the weapon modular and ambidextrous. The 191 allows for a lot of customization, coming with a longest fuck rail on top, standard issue prismatic optics, and removable panels on the handguard to allow even more rails to be added. Being such a new rifle, it hasn't seen any major conflicts, but everything I've heard about this thing that isn't from China Hatebone or Redditars has been great, and it seems to be damn sight better than the Type 95. Time will tell if this is going to be an all-time great rifle, so we're just going to have to wait and see. What we won't have to wait and see is if QJ is an all-time great, so let's get to her, and her skills, content upgrades. So, QJ is a lot simpler of a character than most. She has one job, follow-up action supports. There are other more active ways to play QJ, but if I'm being honest with you, they're just less effective. So let's start with her passive, Steady Plant, her bread and butter. Firstly, she gets 1 point of confectance whenever she deals damage. This includes her follow-ups, skills, and basic attack, letting her gain up to 4 confectance points per turn if she gets her action supports in, letting her gain confectance literally faster than she could ever possibly hope to burn it. The second part of her passive increases damage to targets not protected by cover by 10%, which isn't as useful as it sounds for general content, but is a nice boost against bosses. Finally, whenever an enemy takes targeted damage from an ally, she performs an instance of action support, dealing 90% of her attack as physical and 2 stability damage up to 3 times per turn, with her range of 8 fucking tiles. I cannot stress enough how powerful this passive is. As long as you've got 3 allies performing targeted attacks, she's pumping out 270% of her attack and 6 points of stability every turn. That's not even mentioning the synergy she has with other characters' follow-ups like Wawa, Groza, and Nagant, who all trigger QJ's passive with their counters. It probably goes without saying that this passive is what you should play around, and her cons make it even better, especially this first one. Her C3 increases the damage of all her action supports by 10%, which doesn't sound like much on paper until you remember that action supporting is basically all she does, and the 10% is a standalone multiplier, not a 10% scaling increase, which is better for reasons we'll cover later. But that's not all. C3 also makes all of QG's action supports apply Overburn, which not only adds 10% fixed AoE damage to every one of her attacks, but makes her pair incredibly well with fucking Sharkry, bitch! Woo! Since QJ gets her 3 action supports every round, she can single-handedly get Sharkry to get all her Splice support follow-ups, letting you not only ramp up the damage Shark deals, but give her a gigaton of confectance. Look, we better move on or else this is gonna turn into a second Sharkry video. Her C6 is surprisingly weak, increasing QJ's damage by another 10% against targets that aren't protected by cover. Speaking of weak, QJ's basic attack is honestly solid, as far as basics go. 80% of her attack, an average 2 stability, and a very nice 8 range. But you're never going to use this, so let's move on. Common Rail is like a souped up basic attack, dealing 150% of her attack as burn damage, 3 stability damage, and gives 1 singular stack of support boost 1, a 15% increase to your next support attack, plus another 10% if they're exposed. Which doesn't sound too bad on paper, but is honestly suboptimal when compared to her ult, its saving grace being that it's on a 1-turn cooldown, letting her use it every other turn, meaning she never has to use her actual basic attack, which, is cool. Her V1 is just meh, giving an extra 15% increased damage to support boost 1, bringing it up to 30%. Guide to Victory deals 110% of her attack as AoE burn damage, 3 stability damage, and applies Overburn for 2 turns in any of the cardinal directions. Now, this sounds worse than her skill 1, but for whatever reason, this thing just fucking completely ignores everything. Walls, pits, impassable objects, vision blockers, high ground. QJ's knife gives absolutely 0 fucks. The Overburn application is also nice, letting your other units take advantage of it. At a 1-turn cooldown, this is honestly nice to have, and I've had units one-shot by it in PvP on multiple occasions. Her C2 makes this thing even more lethal, giving it a 100% crit rate against overburned enemies. But honestly, again, it's suboptimal in most circumstances because of her ult, which is pressing the momentum. For 3 confectance point, it gives 3 stacks of support boost 2, a 30% increase to your next support attack, plus 10% on exposed, and increases the number of action supports to 4. If she uses it at full confectance, she gets an extra stack of support boost 2, letting her boost all 4 of her support attacks, and if she does at least 3, it lets her use it again next turn, which you can rinse and repeat. Forever. which, at a base level with no boosts, give her a 30% boosted 360% of her attack as physical damage and 8 stability damage every single turn. Her V4 sweetens the deal, applying Vulnerable 1, a 10% vuln for enemies not protected by cover for 1 turn whenever she action supports, which is great for destroying bosses. And her V5 gives her and the allies she's supporting damage up to, a 20% damage boost for 1 turn before they attack, which is stupid powerful, but doesn't stack with other sources of damage up, which is something to keep in mind if you plan on getting G36. If it wasn't obvious to you already, Qiongjiu is a ridiculously powerful unit, and that's not just me saying that. Being able to put out so much damage for basically no effort is absolutely ridiculous. If you can help it, you want as many Qiongjius as you can get your hands on. Her versatility in mob content, bosses, area defense, PvP, everything cannot be understated. Qiongjiu is a serious contender for the best unit in the game, including on CN. She's a great investment, and if you haven't gotten her already, pick her on your standard banner. Don't tell Vepli I said this, but Qiongjiu is by far the strongest and most applicable unit of the standard SSRs, and burn is an element with a lot of good things to come, meaning your investment of resources on her is incredibly efficient as well. Not to mention, her incredible synergy at V3 with motherfucking Chakri, bitch! Woo! Alright, now that we've learned what she does, let's talk about her nodes. Her first node is Concentration, which is the classic start with full confectance almost everyone has, but this is honestly one of the few scenarios where I can't help but recommend running it. The extra stack of support boost 2 from her ult right off the rip lets your Qiongjiu immediately start letting off her boosted support attacks and maintain them in perpetuity with no downtime, which you normally couldn't do without sacrificing a turn to max your confectance. Her next node is Efficient Planning, which is honestly also a nice node that I personally always run. It cleanses 1 buff from her target before a support attack, which combined with her ult lets her cleanse up to 4 buffs in a turn for basically free. While cleansing buffs isn't always super useful, it's usually just nice to have, and not having to do anything weird for its benefit definitely makes it worth it for me. Targeted Training is her best node, applying defense down 2, an absolutely nasty 30% defense shred whenever she does a support attack. You'd have to be fucking stupid not to run this. Shredding 30% of an enemy's defense is always useful, and with no cooldown or conditions outside of support attacking, it's got stupidly good uptime, and is gonna help you kill trash mobs, elites, and bosses with lethal efficiency, especially when combined with her V4. From this point forward, the nodes become way less worth it. Point of Vulnerability lets Guide to Victory hit up to 7 additional enemies, with all enemies past the first taking 30% reduced damage from it, which sounds good on paper, but like, it's a straight line 1 tile AoE. I can barely get 2 enemies in a line, let alone fucking 8. Maybe we'll get some funny map that just has a bunch of enemies in a straight line for you, and this will be fun and useful, but for now, I'd just skip it. Necessary Adjustment gives her Blazing Assault 2 a 50% attack boost for 2 turns if she exploits a phase weakness, which is solid if you find yourself actively attacking with Qiongjiu a lot. But the limitation of having to hit someone weak to fire or AR damage types makes it a little more situational. Readiness is kind of a joke, making Qiongjiu immune to displacements while under the effects of Support Boost, which I found out affects Fear and Taunt, which, even then, doesn't come up too often. I definitely grab it for content that does though, since both Fear and Taunt are a pain in the ass. Her capstone, Strategic Negotiation, is honestly one of the best in the game, giving her a 5% crit rate boost and increasing her damage by 7% outside of her turn, giving a constant damage boost to all of her support attacks, which is as crazy as it sounds. Now, let's move on to her weapons. And to be straight with you, there's one rifle in the SRs and Elites that stands well above the rest, and I'll let you know when we get to them, if you haven't already figured it out. But to start things softly, the Odds 14 does nothing for Qiongjiu, has low base attack, and should only be used if you don't have anything else. The brand new G36 is bad too, with a slightly higher base attack than the Odds, but a trait that only happens when she heals, which Qiongjiu can't do. But an effect that puts it above, increasing damage dealt and healing by 10 to 20% to get its targets with less than 50 to 100% of their max health. Meaning at max calibration or just higher calibrations, it's a constant 20% damage increase, especially since Qiongjiu is usually the second one to attack, making it very easy to meet the effect. Being such a new rifle though, I really doubt you have a V6 G36 lying around, unless you're a whale, and if you are a whale, you've got better options. Speaking of better options, the Type 95 has a higher base damage, a trait that actually works for Qiongjiu and an effect that you could feasibly use without having max or close to max calibrations. That being said, the Type 95 is nothing fantastic. You probably don't have them lying around since they're fairly new, and like the G36, there's better options that are easier to get. Moving on. The model Alpha is tied for the highest base damage among the SRs, has the same trait as the Type 95, but an effect that Qiongjiu literally cannot use. But honestly, this stat stick is worth. The jump and base attack from this rifle and the ones before it are night and day, and Qiongjiu specifically really loves raw stat sticks. So even with the useless effect, it's worth grabbing. The Robinson modular rifle does the exact same thing as the model Alpha, but Qiongjiu can actually use its effect, getting a 20% damage boost from using her ult that she can then use on Common Rail and Common Rail only. Since Qiongjiu's knife counts as an AoE damage, Common Rail is your only option. You will use Common Rail. You will live in the pod. You will eat the bugs. If you don't use Common Rail, like with the Alpha, because they're the same fucking gun stat-wise, it's a good stat stick. Her best SR should have been obvious from the start, the QBZ 191, which is in my opinion the best SR in the game. Its only downside is this slightly lower base attack, but in exchange for that 7 base attack, you get the easiest to proc effect in the game, increasing all damage dealt by 20% until her next action whenever she gets a buff, which is already basically guaranteed. But its trait also gives a random 1-turn buff at the start of the turn if she's at max HP, so it can very feasibly proc itself. Being a standard SR as well, they're incredibly easy to get, and you can very easily select one on the free battle pass. Now, if you're inquisitive, you're probably thinking,
"But Dorito, why would I use the QBZ on Qiongjiu over any of my other AR DPS units?"
Well, if you remember, Qiongjiu attacks up to 4 times a turn if you use her ult, and half her skills give her self buff, so she's easily able to not only take great advantage of its effect with her multiple attacks, but can get it to proc stupid easy with her self buffs, not to mention her incredible base damage potential to start with. For the elites, we've got some nice options, and one really bad one. That bad one being the Maid's Rules, tying for the lowest base damage of the elites, a trait that only procs on heals, which Qiongjiu can't do, and an effect that requires her to maintain maximum stability to get a 10 to 20% damage and healing bonus, which, if I'm being honest, isn't actually as bad as it sounds. That being said, you've got serious mental issues if this is what you're putting on your Qiongjiu, so we're just gonna scurry on to the Planeta, which is weird to have this low, but it's honestly very justified here. Despite boasting the highest base attack of all the ARs currently in the game and a really nice 25% crit damage boost, its effect increases the damage of active skills, something Qiongjiu rarely does under normal circumstances. While it is a nice stat stick, give it to literally anyone else unless Qiongjiu is literally your only DPS. Heavy Strings is in the same boat for another reason. Basically, it's a limited 5-star weapon made for another character and has the 3rd lowest base damage of the elites. Apart from that though, 25% crit damage is nice, and the 20 to 100% chance to cleanse a buff whenever she attacks is also nice. But the rest of its effect blows. For every 3 to 1 tiles she moves, she gets a 5 to 10% stacking damage buff that stacks up to twice. However, Qiongjiu's base movement is 5, just sort of the 6 you need to get the full 20%, so getting neutered on that front blows. The main and more serious issue is forcing your Qiongjiu, who requires good positioning to be able to maintain her 3 to 4 support attacks per turn quota, to move 3 tiles every turn. More often than not, dropping Qiongjiu somewhere she can hit a bunch of enemies and leaving her there forever to ult every round is the ideal way to use her. And unlike other characters with less support attacks to worry about, not getting all of your attacks off is not only inefficient, but hinders your Qiongjiu's ability to lay down damage in the future since support attacks are her main source of confectance as well. If you can help it, I just pass on the strings, but if you've got no other option, it's a decent enough upgrade to the SRs. Just plan a little bit. The Guerneau has the same low base attack as the Maid's Rules, but that honestly solid random buff at max HP trait a lot of the rifles have, and an effect that increases damage dealt by 5 to 15% for every ally within 5 tiles, stacking 3 to 2 times, which is honestly good. Qiongjiu being near allies is very common because of her support attack playstyle, and the Guerneau plays into that perfectly. The icing on the cake is the extra 2 to 4 tiles of movement if you have 3 to 1 units nearby, to let her keep up with some of your movement-heavy units and get into advantageous spots. And if you don't need to move, just don't. That freedom of choice is awesome, and I honestly had a lot of fun trying this thing out. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the moment you've all been waiting for. We've saved the best for last. Put your hands together for the incomparable Golden Melody, which boasts the 2nd highest base attack, a kinda average, not gonna lie, 15% attack boost, the Everyman's AR trait, and an effect that increases her damage period by 10 to 20% with absolutely no condition, and increases the damage of her support attacks, all of them, by a stacking 10 to 20% buff that stacks 2 to 4 times. This shit is absolutely fucking nasty on QJ and gives her everything she wants. She uses it ridiculously well and will seriously outdamage some of your best DPS units by just fucking standing there. If you have the Doritos, not me silly, for it, get this thing. Fuck it. If you don't have the fucking Doritos, get this thing. Get this thing right fucking now! For attachments, you want Phase Strike or Physical Boost, with Burn Boost becoming the best once her mod key comes out. And for attachments, Attack, Crit Damage. Thank you again so much for watching, and an extra special thanks to my returning viewers. If I missed something, got something wrong, pronounced something wrong, or you really can't contain your love for the Chinese Communist Party, please leave a comment. It is a ritual at this point to read every single one of your guys' comments. If you want to see what's on my mind in between my uploads, I made a new Twitter account for the channel, @KansaiDorito. I promise I'll do my best to keep the stuff I post in their channel related, or if public social media isn't your thing, I have a Discord server I spend a whole lot of time in. Just know I'm a little more candid in there. A link to that will be in the description. I recently hit another goal in my Ko-fi, becoming a millionaire in Congolese franc, a personal thanks to Dylan, Kuba, Far Knight, Dacian, Aura, Bones, J Ryder, and Full Auto Alchemist. And an extra special thanks to Jadiz, who single-handedly covered half the goal by himself. Because of you guys, I get to properly acquire units and weapons to test to give everyone the best guides possible, and I seriously can't thank you enough. If you're interested in supporting me, my Ko-fi is in the description. Now that that's out of the way, I wanted to let you guys know that my next video won't be an explained video. I had wanted to do something special when I hit 10k subs, but due to poor planning on my part, nothing ever really came of it. Now, it's late as hell, but I still wanted to show some appreciation to my community, and make an open Q&A on my Discord server. Those questions will be answered in my next upload, and honestly won't be too GFL focused, so if you're only really watching me for GFL content, I wouldn't bother. As for who's after that, it's Nemesis, who absolutely rolled the votes. After her, it's looking like Ulrid, but if you want to change that, leave a vote by commenting on this, or any of my other videos, letting me know who you want to see next. I keep track of all of them. Alright, I'm just gonna thank you one last time for being the best community ever, and I hope you stay strapped.
Jesus. The way his body's flying.
That's a tank. That's still a tank. That's still a tank!
Nothing like pornography starring men.
Whoa, whoa, whoa! What?